In a sunlit kitchen in Portland, Oregon, a 34-year-old passionate home cook was about to face humiliation that would transform into unexpected triumph. What began as a tense holiday dinner with critical in-laws evolved into a culinary revolution. When Emma Taylor turned their mockery into motivation, establishing a thriving restaurant business in the very backyard where her cooking dreams were once ridiculed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Emma wasn't your typical amateur chef. For 8 years, she had perfected recipes passed down through generations, adding her own modern twist to traditional comfort food. When her in-laws' constant criticism threatened to extinguish her passion, she discovered that the garden behind their colonial home would become the stage for her most delicious revenge, success served on a silver platter. Before we continue with Emma's journey, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something special that will truly inspire you. Emma Taylor stood at her kitchen window, watching her husband Mark's silver SUV navigate the gravel driveway of his parents' sprawling colonial home. The familiar sight should have brought comfort, but instead, a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She clutched the carefully prepared casserole dish, its warmth seeping through the oven mitts and into her trembling hands. "It's just one dinner," Mark said, squeezing her shoulder reassuringly. "For hours tops, then we can escape." His voice carried that particular strain she recognized, the sound of someone caught between loyalty to his wife and lifelong deference to demanding parents. Even from a distance, Emma could see Judith Blackwell on the porch, her tall figure outlined against the pristine white columns. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair caught the afternoon sunlight, and her posture remained as rigid as her expectations. Behind her stood Richard Blackwell, Mark's father, a retired judge whose critical eye had evaluated countless defendants with the same scrutiny he now directed toward his daughter-in-law. "Remember, Mom's been planning this dinner for weeks," Mark added, his voice dropping to a whisper as they approached the house. "Please just try to get along." Emma wanted to object. The words formed on her tongue along with all the reasonable complaints about Judith's constant criticism, Richard's disapproving glances, and their collective dismissal of anything she contributed to family gatherings. But the desperation beneath Mark's casual tone had undone her, the way it always did. "Emma, dear," Judith called through a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You didn't need to bring anything. I've prepared a complete meal." The dismissal stung more than it should have. Emma followed the Blackwells into their immaculate house, the casserole dish suddenly feeling inadequate in her hands. The aroma of Judith's signature roast filled the air, a scent that should have been welcoming but instead felt like a gastronomic challenge thrown at Emma's feet. "You can set that somewhere," Judith waved vaguely toward the kitchen, already turning her attention to Mark. "Son, your father wants to show you the new landscaping in the backyard." Emma found herself alone in Judith's showroom-perfect kitchen, surrounded by high-end appliances that gleamed with minimal use. She carefully placed her homemade wild mushroom and leek casserole, a recipe she'd spent 3 days perfecting, on the counter beside platters of Judith's carefully arranged appetizers. "I see you've brought another interesting dish," Judith remarked upon returning, eyeing the casserole with barely concealed skepticism. "How rustic." "It's a new recipe," Emma explained, genuinely excited despite herself. "I use 3 types of wild mushrooms and a reduction that takes almost a full day to." "We should probably refrigerate it," Judith interrupted, already reaching for the dish. "The table is already set with my prepared menu." By the time dinner was served, Emma's casserole had been relegated to the far end of the table, almost hidden behind an elaborate flower arrangement. Judith presented her traditional roast with theatrical flourish, describing each component of the meal in terms that made Emma's contributions seem almost primitive by comparison. "Now this," Richard announced, gesturing toward Judith's roast, "is proper cooking. None of those trendy food blog concoctions. This is how real food should taste." Emma felt her cheeks burn as she watched her in-laws take performative bites of her casserole, their expressions shifting from skepticism to barely disguised distaste. "It's certainly flavorful," Judith commented, reaching for her water glass. "Perhaps a bit overwhelming for a side dish." "What exactly did you put in this?" Richard asked, pushing the serving away after one bite. "It's rather aggressive. Wild mushrooms, leeks, thyme from my garden, and a sherry reduction," Emma explained, her voice growing smaller with each word. "It's meant to be earthy and complex." "Well, it's certainly something," Judith replied with a tight smile. "Not everyone appreciates experimental cooking. Some of us prefer reliable, traditional recipes that don't try to reinvent the wheel." Mark changed the subject quickly, asking his father about golf, but the damage was done. Emma pushed food around her plate, appetite gone, as the conversation flowed around her. The Blackwells discussed their country club, their upcoming cruise, their neighbors' landscaping failures, a carefully curated world where Emma remained perpetually on the outside. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As dessert approached, Judith's famous pavlova that she reminded everyone had won the country club baking contest 3 years running, the conversation somehow circled back to cooking. Emma's little food experiments remind me of when Mark went through his chef phase in college. Judith laughed, serving perfect portions of meringue and berries. Remember that disaster with the paella, Richard? Hard to forget, Richard chuckled. Nearly burned down the apartment trying to impress that girlfriend. Mom, Mark interjected, shooting an apologetic glance toward Emma. Oh, I'm just teasing, Judith continued, unperturbed. But really, Emma, there's no shame in using reliable cookbooks rather than inventing these unusual combinations. I'd be happy to share my collection with you. Perhaps start with something basic? Emma felt something shift inside her, a quiet snap like a ribbon breaking under too much tension. For years of enduring passive-aggressive comments about her cooking, her career choices, her inability to provide grandchildren, it all crystallized in that moment of pure condescension. Actually, Judith, Emma replied, her voice steadier than she expected, I studied culinary arts before switching to marketing. My unusual combinations come from understanding flavor profiles and techniques, not from lack of knowledge. The table fell silent. Mark stared at his pavlova, while Richard's eyebrows raised in surprise. Judith's smile remained fixed, but her knuckles whitened around her dessert fork. Well, Judith finally responded, formal training clearly doesn't guarantee success on the plate. The ride home was silent, the tension between Emma and Mark thick enough to touch. When they finally reached their modest apartment, Mark sighed deeply. You promised you'd try, he said, his voice somewhere between accusation and exhaustion. I did try, Emma replied, the evening's frustration finally boiling over. I've been trying for 4 years, Mark. I bring dishes they never eat. I endure criticism about everything from my career to my cooking. When do they try? They're just old-fashioned, Mark defended weakly. Cooking is Mom's thing. She feels threatened when you bring dishes. So I'm supposed to pretend I can't cook? Pretend I don't have passion or skill because it might bruise Judith's ego? The argument circled without resolution, ending the way these discussions always did, with Mark retreating to his office and Emma alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the cookbooks and specialty ingredients that represented her true passion. That night, unable to sleep, Emma scrolled through her phone, pausing at photos of dishes she'd created over the years. There was the 7-layer chocolate cake for Mark's birthday that had taken 3 days to perfect. The Thanksgiving turkey that even Richard had grudgingly complimented. The Christmas cookies that neighbors requested every year. On impulse, she opened her neglected Instagram account and posted a photo of her mushroom casserole, the portion she'd saved at home, beautifully plated and garnished. She added a description of the ingredients, the techniques, the inspiration behind the dish. It was past midnight, and she expected no response, but the act itself felt like reclaiming something that the evening had stolen from her. By morning, the post had received 43 likes and several comments requesting the recipe. Emma stared at her phone in surprise, reading enthusiastic responses from friends, former colleagues, and even a few strangers who had somehow discovered her post. This looks amazing. Need this recipe ASAP. Are you selling these anywhere? I'd buy in a heartbeat. That last comment came from Layla Chen, a former marketing colleague who had opened a small event planning business. Emma hesitated, then replied, not selling yet, but always happy to cook for friends. Within minutes, Layla responded, serious question, would you cater a small business lunch next week? My usual caterer cancelled, and this looks exactly like what I need. We'll pay professional rates. Emma's heart raced as she stared at the message. She had catered informally for friends before, but a professional gig was different. Before she could overthink it, she typed, I'd love to. Let's discuss details. When Mark emerged from the bedroom, Emma was already making lists, calculating costs, planning a menu that would showcase her skills while remaining approachable for a business lunch. What's all this? He asked, eyeing the scattered papers. An open laptop. I'm catering a business lunch for Layla next week, Emma replied, waiting for his reaction. Mark's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Like, as a favor? As a paid job, Emma clarified. Professional rates, proper catering. Is that wise? You have a full-time marketing job, and cooking for friends is different from professional catering. The doubt in his voice echoed his mother's dismissive tone from the previous night, and Emma felt that same ribbon of patience threatening to snap. "I'm not quitting my job," she assured him, though the thought had flickered tantalizingly through her mind. "It's one lunch. But I'm good at this, Mark. Really good. And I'm tired of pretending I'm not because it makes your mother uncomfortable." The business lunch for 15 executives was a calculated risk. Emma took 2 vacation days to prepare, transforming their small apartment kitchen into a production line. She created a menu that balanced sophistication with accessibility. Her controversial mushroom tarts made an appearance, alongside herb-crusted chicken, seasonal vegetable tranches, and miniature desserts that showcased her technical skills. The event went better than she had dared to hope. Layla's clients raved about the food, 2 participants requested Emma's information for their own events, and Layla herself immediately booked her for a larger function the following month. "You should be doing this full-time," Layla commented as they packed up the remaining food. "This is not hobby-level cooking, Em. This is the real deal." The seed that had been planted began to grow, nurtured by each new catering request that came through Emma's newly created business Instagram account. She named her fledgling enterprise Humble Feast, partly as a private joke about Judith's dismissal of her rustic cooking, and partly because it reflected her philosophy about food, that even humble ingredients could create extraordinary experiences when handled with skill and passion. For 3 months, Emma maintained her careful balancing act, marketing executive by day, caterer by night and weekend. Mark's initial skepticism had softened somewhat in the face of actual income from her side business, though he still referred to it as her hobby catering in a tone that suggested he was humoring a passing phase. The real test came when Layla asked Emma to cater a significant garden party, 50 guests, upscale menu, professional service requirements. The location? A historic property just 2 blocks from the Blackwells' colonial home. "You're catering in my parents' neighborhood?" Mark asked when Emma shared the news. "Mom will definitely hear about this." "Would that be so terrible?" Emma countered. "Maybe she'd finally see that my cooking isn't just experimental food blog concoctions." Mark looked uncomfortable. "You know how she is about being the culinary authority. Remember Thanksgiving when she found out you'd helped Aunt Sarah with the turkey technique?" Emma remembered all too well, the cold silence, the pointed comments about traditional methods versus internet trends. The way Judith had managed to turn a simple brining suggestion into evidence of Emma's culinary overreach. "I'm not doing this to compete with your mother," Emma said carefully. "I'm doing this because I'm good at it, I love it, and people are willing to pay me for it." The garden party proved to be a pivotal moment in Emma's culinary journey. The hosts, a retired surgeon and his wife, were prominent members of the same social circle as the Blackwells. The event was flawless, from the past hors d'oeuvres to the elegant plated desserts. Emma had hired 2 service staff to help, giving her business a professional polish that elevated it beyond casual catering. As she was packing up, the hostess approached with an elegant older woman in tow. "Emma, this is Vivian Montgomery. She hasn't stopped raving about your food all evening." Emma wiped her hands on her apron before shaking Vivian's outstretched hand. "My dear, that mushroom tart was extraordinary," Vivian said. "Are you formally trained?" "Culinary arts at Portland State, but I didn't complete the program," Emma admitted. "Marketing paid the bills more reliably." "What a waste," Vivian replied, though her tone held no judgment. "The world has enough marketers but far too few chefs who understand balance like you do. Do you have a restaurant?" "Just catering. For now," Emma explained. "Operating out of my home kitchen, which limits how much I can take on." Vivian nodded thoughtfully. "I sit on the board of the Portland Culinary Foundation. We have an incubator program for promising chefs without the capital for traditional restaurant startups. You should apply." As Vivian explained the program, commercial kitchen access, mentorship, pop-up opportunities, Emma felt a door opening to a future she had barely allowed herself to imagine. By the time she arrived home, her mind was racing with possibilities. Mark was waiting up, his expression telling her that something had happened. "Mom called," he said without preamble. Apparently several of her friends were at the Montgomery party. They couldn't stop talking about the talented young chef who catered. "Mom wanted to know if it was you." Emma set down her catering bags. "And what did you tell her?" "The truth," Mark shrugged. "That you've been building a catering business. That people love your food." "And how did she take that?" Mark's grimace told her everything. "She's invited us to dinner on Sunday. She specifically said to bring one of your signature dishes because she's curious about what all the fuss is about." The invitation was not what it appeared on the surface. Emma recognized it immediately as a challenge, a culinary duel disguised as family dinner. For the next 3 days, she debated what dish would best represent her skills while remaining approachable enough that Judith couldn't dismiss it as pretentious. She settled on her roasted pear and blue cheese tart with walnut crust, a dish That balanced sweet, savory, and sharp flavors in a way that showcased technical skill while using ingredients that Judith would recognize and, hopefully, respect. Sunday arrived with ominous clouds gathering both in the sky and in Emma's mind. As they pulled into the Blackwells' driveway, she noticed additional cars parked along the street. "Did your mom invite other people?" she asked Mark, suddenly. Nervous. "She didn't mention anyone else," he replied, looking equally surprised. The answer became clear when Judith opened the door, beaming with artificial hospitality. "There you are. Everyone's been waiting to meet the mysterious caterer. Who's become the talk of the neighborhood?" Emma stepped into the living room to find 6 of Judith's friends from the country club arranged like a judging panel, cocktails in hand, expectant smiles on their carefully made-up faces. "Ladies, this is my daughter-in-law, Emma," Judith announced. "She's brought one of her creations for us to sample before dinner." The ambush was so transparent that Emma might have laughed if her heart wasn't pounding so violently. This wasn't a family dinner, it was a public testing, arranged to put her in her place before Judith's social circle. "I didn't realize we'd have company," Emma said, forcing a smile as she shook hands with Judith's friends. "Oh, it was just a spontaneous gathering," Judith lied smoothly. "The girls were so curious when I mentioned you'd been catering around the neighborhood." Richard appeared with drinks for Emma and Mark, his expression unreadable. "Judith's been preparing all day," he mentioned. "A full traditional Sunday roast." The implication was clear: whatever trendy offering Emma had brought would be positioned as an appetizer, a prelude to Judith's main event. The power dynamics were perfectly orchestrated to maintain Judith's culinary supremacy. Emma placed her tart on the dining room table, where Judith had reluctantly cleared a small space among her own elaborate spread. As the women gathered around, Emma briefly explained the components: the handmade walnut pastry, the blue cheese custard, the pears roasted with honey and thyme. "Blue cheese in a tart," one woman commented, her tone skeptical. "How unusual." "It's actually a classical French combination," Emma explained. "The sharpness of the cheese balances the sweetness of the roasted pears." Judith cut the tart with surgical precision, serving miniature portions as if concerned the flavors might be overwhelming. Emma watched as each woman took a tentative bite, their expressions shifting from polite skepticism to, in most cases, genuine surprise. "This is quite lovely," admitted a woman Judith had introduced as the country club's social committee chair. "The crust especially, so delicate." "The flavor balance is impressive," added another, reaching for a second bite. "Judith, you never told us your daughter-in-law was so talented." Judith's smile remained fixed, though Emma could see the slight tightening around her eyes. "Emma has always been experimental in the kitchen. I prefer traditional techniques myself." "Traditional has its place," the social chair replied, "but this is something special." "Do you cater private events, Emma?" "My daughter's engagement party is next month." Before Emma could answer, Judith smoothly intervened. "Let's move to the dining room, shall we? The roast will get cold." Throughout dinner, Judith's perfectly adequate but utterly unsurprising roast, the conversation, repeatedly returned to Emma's tart. Each compliment seemed to physically pain Judith, whose attempts to redirect attention to her own cooking grew increasingly transparent. "Your mother-in-law tells us you work in marketing," one guest mentioned during dessert. "Is the catering just a hobby then?" Emma felt Mark tense beside her, anticipating her answer. "It started that way," Emma admitted. "But it's becoming more than that. I've been invited to apply for a culinary incubator program with the Portland Culinary Foundation." The table fell silent. Even Mark turned to stare at her, as this was the first he'd heard of the opportunity. "An incubator program?" Judith finally asked, her voice carefully neutral. "What exactly does that involve?" "Commercial kitchen access, mentorship from established chefs, pop-up opportunities," Emma explained. "Eventually, potentially, a restaurant space." "A restaurant?" Richard's eyebrows shot up. "That's quite a leap from weekend catering, isn't it?" "Restaurants are extremely risky investments. Which is why the incubator program is so valuable," Emma countered. "It provides infrastructure without requiring the capital investment of a traditional restaurant launch." The discussion that followed revealed the true nature of Judith's concern. It wasn't simply that she felt threatened by Emma's culinary skills, it was that cooking was supposed to remain in the domestic sphere, a hobby rather than a profession. The idea that Emma might build a career around something Judith considered her own domain of expertise challenged not just her culinary authority but her entire worldview. "Well," Judith finally pronounced as the evening wound down, "I suppose there's no harm in exploring these little ventures while you're young. When children come along, you'll appreciate the stability of your marketing career." The drive home was unusually quiet, but not with the tense silence that typically followed visits to the Blackwells. This was a thoughtful quiet, broken eventually by Mark. You never mentioned the incubator program, he said, his tone neutral rather than accusatory. Vivian just told me about it last week, Emma replied. I wasn't hiding it. I just wanted to research it properly before bringing it up. And have you? Researched it? Emma nodded. The application deadline is next Friday. It's competitive, they only accept 3 chefs per cycle. But Vivian seems to think I have a chance. Mark was quiet for another mile before asking, Is this what you really want? To leave marketing for restaurants? The question hung between them, not just about career change but about identity, about the future they'd loosely planned that hadn't included Emma running a restaurant. I think it might be, she admitted. I've never felt about marketing the way I feel about cooking. Marketing feels like work. Cooking feels like me. When they arrived home, Mark surprised her by pulling out a bottle of wine they'd been saving for a special occasion. As he poured 2 glasses, he asked, So what would you serve? If you had your own restaurant? It was the first time he'd engaged with her culinary ambitions as something real rather than hypothetical. Emma felt something shift between them. As they stayed up late into the night, talking through menu concepts, restaurant names, the kind of atmosphere she'd create. The application process for the culinary incubator program consumed Emma's free time for the next week. She crafted a business plan, developed sample menus, gathered testimonials from catering clients, and prepared for the practical component, a tasting where applicants would present 3 signature dishes to the selection committee. Mark's support remained cautious but present. He helped her source ingredients, offered to taste test variations, and didn't complain when their apartment was transformed into a test kitchen each evening after work. The day before her tasting presentation, Emma received an unexpected call. From Vivian Montgomery. Emma, dear, I wanted to give you a heads up, Vivian said without preamble. Judith Blackwell has been calling board members. Emma's stomach dropped. About me? She hasn't mentioned you by name, but she's suddenly very interested in the selection criteria for the incubator program. She's particularly concerned about candidates jumping into the industry without proper qualifications or experience. The implication was clear, Judith was attempting to undermine Emma's application behind the scenes. The revelation shouldn't have surprised her, yet the deliberate sabotage still shocked Emma. I'm only telling you this because I want you to be prepared, Vivian continued. Your application will be judged on its merits, but board politics can get complicated. Just make sure your tasting is undeniable. After hanging up, Emma sat motionless at her kitchen counter, emotions cycling between hurt, anger, and determination. Mark found her there an hour later, surrounded by revised recipe notes. Everything okay? He asked, noticing her intense expression. Emma told him about Vivian's call, watching his face carefully as he processed the information. You think my mother would really try to sabotage your application? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. You know her better than I do, Emma replied. Would she? Mark's silence was confirmation enough. Eventually, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. What can I do to help? The question, simple, straightforward, an offer of alliance, rather than mediation, felt like a turning point. Help me refine these recipes, Emma said, pushing her notes toward him. They need to be perfect. The tasting presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Foundation's test kitchen. Emma arrived early, methodically unpacking ingredients and organizing her workspace. The other applicants, a former sous chef from a closed fine dining restaurant, and a pop-up barbecue specialist, nodded in professional acknowledgement as they claimed their own stations. The selection committee arrived precisely on time, 5 board members, including Vivian, plus 2 guest judges, established chefs from successful Portland restaurants. Emma's heart nearly stopped when she saw the final person entering the room, Judith Blackwell, immaculately dressed and wearing an expression of benevolent interest that didn't reach her eyes. Vivian approached Emma's station while the others were settling in. I'm sorry, she whispered. She made a last-minute donation to the Foundation's scholarship fund. The chairman invited her to observe. Emma nodded, her hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Judith's presence changed nothing about the food she would present, it only raised the stakes of the performance. Each applicant had 45 minutes to prepare and plate 3 dishes that represented their culinary philosophy. Emma had chosen strategically, a refined version of her controversial mushroom tart as an appetizer, a main course of herb-crusted rack of lamb with seasonal vegetables, and a deconstructed lemon tart that showcased both technical skill and creativity. As she cooked, Emma was aware of Judith circulating among the committee members, engaging in quiet conversation, occasionally glancing toward Emma's station with a smile that resembled a predator watching prey. Rather than allowing the scrutiny To rattle her, Emma channeled her focus entirely into her food, each knife cut precise, each temperature perfect, each plate a composed vision of her culinary perspective. When presentation time arrived, Emma explained each dish clearly and confidently, answering technical questions from the professional chefs with knowledge that revealed both her formal training and self-taught expertise. She watched as the committee tasted her food, noting their expressions of surprise and appreciation. "The balance in this mushroom tart is exceptional," commented one of the guest chefs. "The earthiness is present but controlled, allowing the other elements to shine." "Your protein cookery is precise," added another. "The lamb is perfectly medium rare throughout." Even as the positive feedback accumulated, Emma noticed Judith leaning toward the committee chairman, whispering something that made him nod thoughtfully. When the tasting concluded and the applicants were asked to wait outside while the committee deliberated, Emma felt conflicted. Her food had spoken for itself, that much was clear from the judges' reactions. But Judith's influence remained an unknown variable in the equation. 30 minutes later, the applicants were called back in. The chairman stood to address them. "All three candidates have presented impressive work today," he began. "The committee has made its decision based on culinary execution, business viability, and alignment with the Foundation's mission." Emma held her breath as he named the successful applicants. The barbecue specialist was selected first, followed by the former sous chef. When the chairman paused before announcing the final spot, Emma could feel Judith's gaze fixed on her, practically vibrating with satisfaction at what she assumed would be Emma's disappointment. "Our final spot goes to Emma Taylor, whose refined approach to accessible cuisine shows tremendous promise." The mixture of emotions that flooded through Emma, relief, vindication, triumph, was almost overwhelming. As the committee members approached to congratulate her, she caught sight of Judith's face, frozen in a mask of stunned disbelief. Vivian appeared at Emma's elbow, her voice low but audible. "Your food was undeniable, dear. Even Judith's concerns about your lack of professional experience couldn't override what the committee tasted on those plates." The incubator program began the following month, granting Emma access to a professional kitchen, mentorship from established chefs, and most importantly, the opportunity to host pop-up dining events throughout Portland. Her first event, a ticketed dinner for 30 guests, sold out within hours of being announced. Mark attended each of her pop-ups, his initial cautious support evolving into genuine pride as he watched diners respond to Emma's food with enthusiasm and praise. He handled reservations, poured wine, and even learned enough about the dishes to explain them to curious guests. The Blackwells, however, remained conspicuously absent from all events, even when Emma, in a gesture of reconciliation, sent personal invitations. Judith declined with transparent excuses, while Richard simply didn't respond at all. 3 months into the program, Emma's pop-ups had generated enough buzz that a local food critic published a glowing review, describing her cooking as, technically, precise yet soulful, ambitious without pretension. The review caught the attention of a property developer who approached Emma after a Sunday brunch service. "I have a unique space that might interest you," the developer explained, handing Emma his card. "It's unconventional, but for the right concept, it could be magical." The unconventional space turned out to be a converted carriage house located on an upscale residential street, specifically, 3 houses down from the Blackwells' colonial home. The property sat behind a main house, accessible through a garden path that opened into a charming courtyard. The carriage house itself had been partially renovated but needed significant work to function as a restaurant. "The zoning is already approved for commercial use," the developer explained as he showed Emma and Mark the space. "The previous owners ran an antique shop here for years. The residential location limits the size, maximum 30 seats. But for an intimate dining concept, it's ideal." Emma walked through the space, envisioning dinner service in the main room, its large windows overlooking the courtyard where seasonal outdoor seating could add another 15 covers. The potential kitchen area would require complete renovation, but its footprint could accommodate the equipment she needed. "What do you think?" she asked Mark as they examined the space. "It's literally in my parents' backyard," he replied, though his tone held more amazement than objection. "Mom will see this as a declaration of war. Or she could see it as an olive branch," Emma countered. "A chance to be part of something special instead of fighting it." The lease terms were favorable. The developer was more interested in bringing a quality restaurant to the neighborhood than in maximizing rental income. With the backing of the Culinary Foundation and a small business loan, Emma signed the lease the following week. The news traveled through the neighborhood with predictable speed. By evening, Mark's phone displayed multiple missed calls from his parents. When he finally answered, he put the call on speaker so Emma could hear. "Is it true?" Judith demanded without greeting. "Is Emma really opening a restaurant 3 houses down from us?" It's true, Mark confirmed. The old Williams carriage house. It's perfect for what she wants to do. Perfect? Judith's voice rose sharply. It's deliberately provocative. It's a direct challenge to me, in my own neighborhood, in front of all my friends. Mom, not everything Emma does is about you, Mark replied with newfound firmness. She's opening a restaurant because she's a talented chef who wants to share her food with people who appreciate it. And she couldn't find a location anywhere in Portland except practically in our backyard? The location is ideal for the concept, Mark explained. Small, intimate, neighborhood-focused. Emma actually hoped you might see it as an opportunity to support her instead of competing with her. Judith's laugh was brittle. Support? She's been undermining me since the day you married her. First with her suggestions about my cooking, then with her catering business and my social circle, and now this? This is not someone seeking support, Mark. This is someone declaring war. After the call ended, Mark looked at Emma with a mixture of resignation and determination. That went about as expected. I really did hope she might see it differently, Emma said, surprised to find she meant it. Despite everything, she had harbored a small hope that her success might eventually break through Judith's hostility, that professional respect might pave the way for personal reconciliation. Mom doesn't change, Mark said simply. But I have. The transformation of the carriage house into Time and Place, the name Emma had chosen for her restaurant, proceeded over the next 3 months. The property developer proved to be a valuable ally, expediting permits and connecting Emma with contractors who understood restaurant requirements. The concept Emma developed was deliberately intimate, a 28-seat restaurant serving a constantly evolving menu that reflected her philosophy of elevated comfort food. The space was designed to feel like a sophisticated dinner party rather than a traditional restaurant, with an open kitchen where guests could watch Emma and her small team at work. As opening night approached, Emma extended another olive branch. A personal letter to the Blackwells inviting them to a private friends and family dinner before the official opening. The response came not as a phone call or text, but as a hand-delivered note from Judith. While we appreciate the invitation, we feel it would be inappropriate to attend given the circumstances of your establishment's location and concept. We wish you well in your endeavor but must decline. Judith and Richard Blackwell, the rejection stung, but Emma refused to let it overshadow the achievement of realizing her dream. The friends and family dinner proceeded without the Blackwells, the restaurant filled instead with supporters who had championed Emma's journey: Vivian Montgomery, Layla Chen, fellow chefs from the incubator program, and neighbors curious about the new establishment in their midst. The official opening night of Time and Place was scheduled for a Thursday evening in early October. Emma arrived at dawn, methodically prepping each component of the tasting menu she had designed as her restaurant's debut statement. Mark joined her mid-morning, handling front-of-house preparations while Emma directed her small kitchen team. A sous chef and 2 line cooks she had carefully selected from applicants eager to be part of the new venture. By 5 p.m., everything was ready, the dining room arranged with seasonal flowers, candles placed on each table, the kitchen gleaming with anticipation. The reservation book was full, with a waiting list already developing for future dates. At 5:30, as Emma was conducting final pre-service checks with her team, Mark appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression troubled. "There's someone here to see you," he said quietly. "My mother." Emma froze momentarily, then nodded. "I'll come out." Judith stood in the empty dining room, surveying the space with the critical eye Emma had come to know well. She was impeccably dressed, as always, but something about her posture seemed less rigid than usual. "Your restaurant is lovely," Judith said as Emma approached, the comment so unexpected that Emma momentarily wondered if she'd misheard. "Thank you," Emma replied cautiously. "We open for service in 30 minutes. "I know." Judith's hands fidgeted with her purse strap, a rare display of uncertainty from someone usually so composed. "I won't stay long, I know." Judith's hands fidgeted with her purse strap, a rare display of uncertainty from someone usually so composed. "I won't stay long. I wanted to see it before everyone else arrived." Emma waited, sensing there was more to this unexpected visit than curiosity about the decor. "Several of my friends have reservations here tonight," Judith continued, her voice carefully neutral. "The Montgomerys, the Prestons, even Richard's golf partner Harold and his wife. Everyone's talking about it." The unspoken implication hung in the air. Judith's social circle had embraced Emma's restaurant, leaving Judith with a choice between stubborn opposition or grudging acknowledgement. "They're welcome here," Emma said simply. "As are you and Richard, anytime." Judith's gaze moved from the dining room to the open kitchen, taking in the gleaming equipment, the organized stations, the professional setup that proved this was no hobby operation. "You've built something substantial," she finally said. The admission clearly difficult. It's not what I would have chosen for you, but it's impressive. Coming from Judith, this qualified acknowledgement was the equivalent of effusive praise. Emma felt a complex emotion rise within her, not quite vindication, not quite reconciliation, but something tentatively bridging the gap between them. I'd be honored if you and Richard would join us for dinner sometime, Emma offered. When you're ready. Judith nodded once, a crisp movement that suggested the conversation had reached its limit. We'll see. Good luck tonight. She turned to leave, then paused. That mushroom tart, the one everyone keeps raving about. Is it on your menu? It is, Emma confirmed. A signature dish. Good, Judith said, and with that cryptic response, she departed as unexpectedly as she had arrived. Mark appeared. From where he'd been tactfully keeping his distance. What was that about? I think, Emma said slowly, that might have been the closest thing to approval we're ever going to get from your mother. Opening night unfolded with the controlled chaos typical of restaurant debuts. Minor crises arose and were handled, a wine delivery arrived late, a kitchen printer jammed mid-service, a guest requested accommodations for an unlisted allergy. But beneath these typical first-night challenges, Emma felt a current of electricity running through the restaurant as guests responded to her food with genuine enthusiasm. From her vantage point in the open kitchen, Emma could observe diners' reactions, noting with satisfaction the way conversations paused when plates arrived, how people leaned forward to examine her compositions, the nods of approval as flavors registered. The true measure of success came not from individual compliments but from the energy in the room, the buzz of conversation, the reluctance of guests to leave even after their meals concluded, the requests for reservations for future dates made before diners had even departed. By the time the last table was cleared, it was past midnight. Emma's feet ached, her chef's coat bore evidence of the evening's work, and exhaustion tugged at her edges, but beneath it all ran a current of pure exhilaration. She had done it. She had created something real, something that existed in the world independently of anyone's approval or disapproval. As she and Mark finally locked the restaurant doors and walked the short distance to their car, Emma glanced down the street toward the Blackwells' home. A single light still burned in an upstairs window, Judith's reading room, Emma knew from previous visits. The image of her mother-in-law awake, perhaps hearing the happy voices of her friends and neighbors returning from dinner at time and place, felt like the closing of a circle. You did it, Mark said, squeezing her hand as they drove home. And it was perfect. Not perfect, Emma corrected with a tired smile. But real. And mine. The reality of restaurant ownership proved both more challenging and more rewarding than Emma had anticipated. The early months were a grueling education in everything beyond cooking, managing staff personalities, handling supplier relationships, navigating the financial complexities of a new business, all while maintaining the creative energy needed to keep the menu fresh and exciting. Mark supported her throughout, initially helping with administrative tasks in the evenings after his own workday ended. As the restaurant gained stability, they hired a manager to handle day-to-day operations, allowing Emma to focus on culinary development and Mark to reclaim some balance in his life. The Blackwells remained conspicuous in their absence during those early months. Emma occasionally spotted Judith walking past the restaurant, slowing just enough to glance at the posted menu or the crowded tables visible through the windows, but never entering. Richard was even more distant, avoiding the entire street where time and place operated, apparently rerouting his daily constitutional to prevent accidental proximity to his daughter-in-law's success. 3 months after opening, Emma received her first professional review from Portland's most respected food critic. The piece was thoughtful and overwhelmingly positive, praising her confident technique and clear point of view, while noting that time and place delivered sophisticated comfort without pretension, food that satisfies both the intellect and the appetite. The review included a photograph of Emma's mushroom tart, the dish that had sparked Judith's initial dismissal years before, now elevated to signature status. The caption described it as a study in balance, earthy, sharp, sweet and savory notes harmonizing in a technical tour de force that belies its rustic appearance. The morning the review was published, Emma arrived at the restaurant to find a small package propped against the front door. Inside was a vintage cookbook, Mastering the Art of French Cooking, by Julia Child, with a note tucked between its pages: every chef needs the classics, even when creating their own path. J.N.R. Blackwell, the gesture, understated but unmistakable, brought unexpected tears to Emma's eyes. It wasn't an apology or even an admission of wrongdoing, but it was an acknowledgement, a recognition of her professional status that represented significant movement from Judith's previous position. That evening, after service concluded, Emma called the Blackwells. When Judith answered, Emma kept her message simple: "Thank you for the cookbook. The reservation book has an opening this Sunday at 7, under your name. I hope you'll join us." The silence that followed was so prolonged that Emma wondered if the connection had been lost. Finally, Judith replied, "We'll be there," and hung up without further comment. Sunday evening brought a normal service, the restaurant three-quarters full with weekend diners, the kitchen running smoothly, the ambience warm and inviting. Emma had placed the Blackwells at a corner table that offered both privacy and a clear view of the open kitchen, wanting them to see her in her element without feeling exposed to other diners' attention. When they arrived, Judith in a conservative blue dress, Richard in his usual sport coat and tie, Mark greeted them with cautious optimism, escorting them to their table while Emma watched from the kitchen. The moment felt weightier than it should have, charged with years of tension and competing expectations. Emma had considered creating a special menu for her in-laws but ultimately decided against it. They would experience time and place as any other guests would, choosing from the regular offerings without special accommodation. It was a professional decision, not a personal one. She wanted them to see her restaurant as it truly was, not as a performance created specifically for their approval. From her position in the kitchen, Emma observed the Blackwells studying the menu, noted Judith's raised eyebrow at certain descriptions, saw Richard's reflexive frown at the absence of traditional steakhouse options. When their server returned to take their order, Emma listened carefully to their selections. Judith chose the controversial mushroom tart to start, followed by pan-seared duck breast with cherry reduction. Richard selected a classic French onion soup and the herb-crusted rack of lamb, the safest, most traditional options on the menu. Their choices felt symbolic somehow, Judith cautiously engaging with Emma's signature creations while Richard clung to familiar territory. As Emma prepared their first courses, she focused on each component with intense concentration, treating these plates with the same care she would give any guest's meal, no special treatment, but no carelessness either. When the dishes were ready, she nodded to her sous chef and stepped out from behind the line, carrying the plates herself. "Good evening," she said, placing the artfully arranged starters before her in-laws. "Thank you for coming." Richard nodded stiffly, while Judith studied the mushroom tart with an expression Emma couldn't quite interpret, somewhere between suspicion and curiosity. "The restaurant seems to be doing well," Judith observed, gesturing to the filled tables around them. "We've been fortunate," Emma replied, deliberately humble rather than triumphant. "People have been very supportive. The Montgomerys dine here every week, apparently," Judith continued, her tone suggesting this information had been reluctantly absorbed from her social circle. "Vivian tells everyone who will listen that she discovered you. She was very helpful with the incubator program," Emma acknowledged. "But the restaurant is a team effort. Mark has been instrumental in making this happen." At the mention of their son, both Blackwells glanced toward the front of the restaurant where Mark was chatting with guests, looking completely at ease in his role as de facto host. "He seems happy," Richard commented, surprise evident in his voice. "We both are," Emma said simply. "I should let you enjoy your meal. Please let me know if you need anything." As she returned to the kitchen, Emma felt the weight of their evaluation, not just of her food but of the life choices that had led to this moment. She reminded herself that their approval, while welcome, was no longer necessary for her confidence or success. Throughout the meal, Emma observed the Blackwells' reactions from her kitchen vantage point. She noticed Judith's momentary pause after the first bite of the mushroom tart, the slight widening of her eyes that signaled surprised appreciation. She saw Richard's reluctant nod after tasting the lamb, a grudging acknowledgement that the dish met his traditional standards while offering something more. Most revealing was their interaction with other diners, several of whom were clearly friends from their social circle. Emma watched as neighboring tables stopped by to greet the Blackwells, enthusiastically praising your daughter-in-law's restaurant and Emma's amazing food. With each interaction, Judith's posture shifted subtly, her reflexive distancing gradually replaced by something that, if not quite pride, at least resembled association rather than detachment. When dessert arrived, a deconstructed lemon tart with lavender-infused cream that represented Emma's playful approach to classics. Mark joined his parents at their table. From the kitchen, Emma could see the conversation flowing more naturally than it had in years, the shared experience of the meal providing neutral territory for reconnection. As the Blackwells prepared to leave, Emma stepped out from the kitchen. Once more. The moment felt significant, not an ending but perhaps the beginning of a different relationship. "Thank you for coming," she said sincerely. "I hope you enjoyed your meal." "It was." Judith paused, seeming to search for words that wouldn't compromise her pride while acknowledging quality. "It was excellent. Particularly the mushroom tart. I would like the recipe, if you're willing to share it." The request, from a woman who had once dismissed that very dish as an experimental food blog concoction, represented a seismic shift in their relationship. It was Judith's way of extending an olive branch, acknowledging Emma's expertise in the language she understood best. "I'd be happy to share it," Emma replied, recognizing the gesture for what it was. "Perhaps you could come by the restaurant next week? We could make it together." The suggestion hung in the air between them, not just an offer to share a recipe but an invitation to a different kind of relationship, one built on shared passion rather than competition. "I'd like that," Judith said finally, the words clearly difficult but genuine. As the Blackwells departed, Richard surprised everyone by pausing at the door. "You've built something impressive here," he said, his usual judgmental tone softened to something approaching respect. "It's not the path we would have chosen for you, but it's a good path." After they left, Mark wrapped his arms around Emma in the quiet kitchen. "Did my father just give us his blessing?" he asked, his voice caught between amusement and disbelief. "I think," Emma replied thoughtfully, "he just acknowledged that our path is ours to choose, not his to approve. And that might be better than blessing." The promised cooking session with Judith took place the following Tuesday morning. In Time and Place's kitchen. It was a careful dance of professional respect and personal reconciliation, with both women navigating the delicate balance between their established patterns and new possibilities. Judith arrived precisely on time, dressed more casually than Emma had ever seen her, though her idea of casual still involved pressed slacks and a coordinated sweater set. She brought with her a small notebook, the same one Emma had seen her use to record recipes from friends at country club functions, a gesture of genuine interest that spoke louder than words. "I've never worked in a professional kitchen before," Judith admitted as Emma showed her around the restaurant's culinary domain. "It's just a bigger version of a home kitchen," Emma replied, deliberately downplaying the intimidation factor. "More equipment, more space, but the same principles." Together they gathered ingredients for the mushroom tart, Emma explaining her selection process for various mushroom varieties, Judith asking surprisingly technical questions about hydration levels and flavor compounds. As they worked side by side, a new language emerged between them, the shared vocabulary of people who, despite their differences, both cared deeply about food and its preparation. "Your technique with pastry is excellent," Judith commented as she watched Emma prepare the tart base. "Who taught you?" "Partly formal training," Emma explained, "but mostly practice and research. I tested this crust recipe 37 times before I was satisfied with it." Judith nodded, a gesture of recognition from one perfectionist to another. "I tested my pavlova recipe 23 times the year I won the country club competition." It was the first time Judith had ever shared anything about her own culinary journey, offering a glimpse of the passion and determination that lived beneath her perfectly maintained exterior. As they continued working, more such moments emerged. Judith describing how she had taught herself French cuisine from books in the early years of her marriage, Emma sharing stories of kitchen disasters that had led to unexpected discoveries. By the time the tart was assembled and slid into the oven, something had shifted between them. Not friendship, exactly, but a mutual recognition of shared values, precision, dedication, the pursuit of excellence, that transcended their differences in approach and expression. As they sat at the chef's table waiting for the tart to bake, Judith studied the restaurant with new eyes. "You've created something remarkable here," she said finally. "Not just the food, but the atmosphere. The concept, it's coherent. Purposeful." "Thank you," Emma replied, the compliment all the more meaningful for coming from someone who had once dismissed her culinary ambitions entirely. "I wasn't supportive," Judith continued, the admission clearly difficult. "When you started catering? Then the incubator program. I saw it as a rejection of everything I valued." "It wasn't about rejection," Emma said carefully. "It was about finding my own path." "In my generation," Judith replied, "women didn't have so many paths. Cooking was domestic, not professional. It was something you did for family, not for strangers. Seeing you turn it into a career felt like you were saying the way I'd spent my life wasn't valuable enough." The revelation that Judith's opposition had stemmed not just from control but from insecurity, from feeling that her life choices were being implicitly criticized, shifted Emma's understanding of their years of conflict. "I've always respected your cooking," Emma said truthfully. "Your technical skills, your knowledge of classics. I wasn't rejecting that tradition, I was building on it, in my own way." The timer chimed, interrupting the moment of connection. Together they removed the perfectly golden tart from the oven, its aroma filling the kitchen with the earthy complexity that had become Emma's signature. "It's beautiful," Judith acknowledged, studying the tart with professional appreciation rather than personal competition. "Different from how I would approach it, but beautiful in its own right." As they shared a slice of the still warm tart, sitting side by side at the chef's counter, Emma realized they had found a path forward, not through pretending their differences didn't exist, but through recognizing that those differences could coexist without threatening either woman's identity or values. "You should come for Sunday dinner," Judith said as she prepared to leave, recipe notebook filled with detailed notes. "At our house. I'm thinking of trying a new approach to my roast." The invitation, and the acknowledgement of experimentation, represented a door opening between their worlds. "We'd love to," Emma replied, recognizing the significance of the gesture. That evening, after regular service, Emma and Mark sat at the bar of Time and Place, sharing a quiet glass of wine. As they discussed the day's events. "So you and my mother made peace over mushroom tart?" Mark asked, equal parts amused and relieved. "Not peace, exactly," Emma clarified. "Understanding, maybe. Recognition that we can value different things without one invalidating the other. That's probably the best outcome possible," Mark acknowledged. "Mom doesn't change her mind so much as she expands it slightly to accommodate new realities." Emma laughed, recognizing the truth in his assessment. "She invited us for Sunday dinner. She's experimenting with her roast recipe." "Now that," Mark said, raising his glass in a toast, "is a genuine miracle." 6 months after opening, Time and Place had established itself as one of Portland's most respected neighborhood restaurants. Reservations remained consistently booked 2 weeks in advance, and Emma had begun receiving invitations to participate in prestigious food festivals and collaborative chef events throughout the Pacific Northwest. The relationship with the Blackwells continued its careful evolution, not the warm embrace of total acceptance, but a respectful coexistence that acknowledged their differences while finding common ground where possible. Sunday dinners became a monthly tradition, alternating between the Blackwells' formal dining room and the more casual atmosphere of Emma and Mark's apartment. Most surprising was the gradual shift in Judith's approach to cooking. After decades of rigid adherence to traditional techniques, she began cautiously experimenting with new ingredients and methods, occasionally asking Emma's advice on a particular flavor combination or presentation technique. These consultations were offered and received with mutual respect, professional exchanges between two dedicated cooks with different perspectives but shared passion. 1 year after Time and Place opened its doors, Emma received an unexpected honor. Portland Monthly's annual food issue named her Chef of the Year, with a feature article detailing her unconventional path to culinary success. The magazine arranged a photo shoot at the restaurant, capturing Emma in her element, confident, focused, surrounded by the team she had built. When the issue was published, the cover featured Emma standing in her kitchen, arms crossed, expression determined but warm. The headline read, "Emma Taylor, From Family Kitchen to Culinary Phenomenon." The morning the magazine hit newsstands, Emma arrived at the restaurant to find a floral arrangement waiting at the door, elegant, understated, distinctly Judith in its classic composition. The card read simply, "Congratulations. Well deserved." JNR. That evening, as service wound down, Emma was surprised to see the Blackwells enter the restaurant without a reservation. They took seats at the chef's counter, directly overlooking Emma's station in the open kitchen. "We thought we'd stop by to celebrate," Richard explained, uncharacteristically relaxed as he settled onto his stool. "The magazine cover calls for champagne, I believe." As Emma continued cooking while chatting with her in-laws, she caught sight of her reflection in the polished surface of the kitchen's hood system. There she was, in her element, creating food that expressed her unique perspective, surrounded by a team that shared her vision, watched over by the very people who had once dismissed her culinary ambitions as frivolous experimentation. The journey from that first tense holiday dinner to this moment had been neither straight nor easy. There had been no dramatic confrontations or tearful reconciliations, just a series of small choices, each building toward authenticity rather than approval, toward creation rather than validation. In the reflection, Emma could also see Judith. Watching her work, the older woman's expression holding something new, not just acceptance or even approval, but something approaching admiration. It was the look of someone who recognized that paths different from her own could lead to destinations worth reaching. As Emma plated a perfect portion of her signature mushroom tart for her mother-in-law, she realized that her greatest achievement wasn't the restaurant, the magazine cover, or even the critical acclaim. It was the quiet revolution she had created. Simply by refusing to diminish her passion to make others comfortable, by building something authentic in the shadow of doubt, something so undeniably excellent that it transformed mockery into respect. "Chef," one of her line cooks called, breaking her momentary reflection. "Order in 2 tasting menus, 1 duck, 1 lamb." Emma turned back to her station, hands moving with practiced precision as she returned to the work she loved. Behind her, she could hear Mark explaining a dish to his parents, his voice confident and proud. Around her, The restaurant hummed with the energy of people sharing food made with skill and heart. This, she thought as she reached for her knife, was the sweetest revenge, not confrontation or vindication, but creation. She had built something real and meaningful where once there had been only doubt and dismissal. And in doing so, she had changed not just her own life, but the perceptions of everyone around her, proving that sometimes, the most powerful response to mockery isn't anger or argument, but excellence so undeniable it transforms critics into customers, skeptics into supporters, and even the most resistant hearts into reluctant admirers. As she sent out another perfect plate, Emma caught Judith's eye across the counter and saw the older woman raise her champagne glass in a subtle toast, not surrender, not complete transformation, but acknowledgement. Recognition that Emma had earned her place in the world through talent, determination, and the courage to believe in her own vision even when those closest to her could not see it. And that, Emma realized as she returned to her work with renewed purpose, was more satisfying than any revenge could ever be. As Emma sent out another perfect plate, a young woman with a notebook approached the chef's counter, catching her eye. With a hesitant wave, Emma recognized her immediately, Zoe Chen, daughter of her first catering client Layla, now a culinary student at Portland State. Chef Taylor, Zoe said, her voice carrying the particular blend of nervousness and determination unique to those at the beginning of their professional journey. I'm sorry to interrupt during service, but I wondered if I could speak with you about the mentorship program. Emma glanced at the ticket times, confirmed her station was under control, and nodded to her sous chef. Take over for 5 minutes, please. She stepped around the counter to speak with Zoe, aware of Judith watching the interaction with curious interest. The culinary department is selecting students for the summer restaurant residency, Zoe explained, clutching her notebook. We need a recommendation from an established chef. I know you're incredibly busy, but your approach to food really resonates with me, and I was hoping. The young woman's voice trailed off, her confidence faltering under the weight of her request. Emma saw in Zoe's expression the same blend of passion and uncertainty she had felt years ago, the desire to create something meaningful balanced against the fear of rejection. Come by tomorrow morning at 9, Emma said without hesitation. Bring your portfolio and we'll discuss the program. I can't promise anything, but I'm happy to consider your application. The relief and excitement that washed over Zoe's face was instantly familiar, the look of someone who has found a potential ally in a challenging journey. Thank you, chef. I'll be here at 9 sharp. As Zoe departed, Emma returned to her station, catching Judith's evaluative gaze across the counter. You're mentoring students now? Judith asked, her tone neutral but interested. When I can, Emma replied, resuming her work with practiced efficiency. Someone did it for me once. It makes a difference. Judith nodded thoughtfully, sipping her champagne. I suppose it does. Later that evening, after the Blackwells had departed and the last customers were finishing their desserts, Mark joined Emma in the kitchen as she conducted final checks before closing. That was a new side of Mom tonight, he observed, leaning against the counter. Almost supportive. Progress, Emma agreed with a smile. Slow, but real. Speaking of progress, Mark continued, his tone shifting to something more serious. The developer called today. Remember when we signed the lease, he mentioned potential expansion opportunities? Emma nodded, wiping down her station with methodical precision. The property developer had mentioned vague possibilities for the future, but Emma had been too focused on launching the restaurant to give them much thought. The main house just came on the market, Mark said. The one in front of the carriage house. He thinks it could be converted into a cooking school or event space, something complementary to the restaurant. Emma's hands paused in their work, her mind immediately racing with possibilities. A dedicated space for classes and private events had been part of her long-term vision, but she'd assumed it was years away from realization. That's a big step, she said carefully. We've only been open a year. A successful year, Mark pointed out. And the developer is willing to work with us on favorable terms. He believes in what you're building here. Emma leaned against the counter, suddenly aware of how far they had come from that first tense holiday dinner, from Judith's dismissal of her food blog concoctions, to a thriving restaurant and now, potentially, an expanded culinary enterprise. Let's talk about it tomorrow, she decided. With fresh eyes and clear heads. That night, lying awake beside Mark in their apartment, Emma found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this crossroads. The path from mockery to success hadn't been straight or simple, it had involved risk, persistence, and the courage to believe in her vision even when those closest to her could not see it. The following morning, Emma arrived at the restaurant early to meet with Zoe. The young culinary student was already waiting outside, portfolio clutched to her chest, 15 minutes before the appointed time. Punctuality, Emma noted with approval. as she unlocked the door. Essential in kitchens. Inside, they settled at a table in the empty dining room. Emma listened attentively as Zoe presented her work, photographs of dishes, detailed notes on technique, thoughtful reflections on flavor combinations. The portfolio revealed not just technical skill but creative thinking and approach to food. That balanced respect for tradition with willingness to explore new territory. "This is promising work," Emma said when Zoe had finished her presentation. "What are your goals after graduation?" "Honestly?" Zoe hesitated, then continued with newfound determination. "I want to open a place that bridges cultures through food. My mother's Chinese heritage, my father's Southern background, I see connections in their culinary traditions that most people miss." The clarity of vision reminded Emma of her own early ambitions, the desire to create something uniquely personal in a world of established expectations. "That won't be an easy path," she said frankly. "People will try to put you in boxes, traditional Chinese or modern American. They'll want to categorize your cooking rather than understand your perspective." "I am proud," Judith acknowledged simply. "Though I can hardly claim credit for her accomplishments." Emma has forged her own path, often despite rather than because of family expectations. The honest assessment, acknowledging both Emma's achievement and Judith's past resistance, felt like the final barrier falling between them. Not erasing history but recognizing it, not pretending perfection but accepting growth. Later that night, as the event concluded and the last guests departed, Emma found herself alone in the demonstration kitchen with Mark, Judith, and Richard. The four of them formed an unlikely team, bound together by an evening of shared purpose that had transcended their complicated history. "Well," Richard said into the companionable silence, "I believe this calls for a proper celebration." He produced a bottle of champagne from somewhere, along with 4 glasses that seemed to materialize through judicial authority rather than conventional means. As they toasted Emma's success, she realized that the greatest triumph of the evening wasn't the professional accolades or potential opportunities. It was standing with the very people who had once doubted her most thoroughly, now sharing genuine pride in what she had created. "To Emma," Judith offered, raising her glass. "Who had the courage to follow her vision, even when others couldn't see it." The acknowledgement, coming from the source of her greatest doubt, completed a circle that had begun years before in that holiday dinner of mockery and dismissal. Not with dramatic confrontation or tearful reconciliation, but with the quiet validation that comes from undeniable excellence. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the venue, Judith paused beside Emma. "About that expansion project Mark mentioned," she said casually. "If you're considering cooking classes, I might have some thoughts about programming for more traditional home cooks." The suggestion, Judith offering to collaborate rather than compete, represented the final transformation of their relationship. From mockery to respect, from competition to cooperation, from rejection to recognition of complementary strengths. "I'd welcome your input," Emma replied sincerely. "There's room for many perspectives in what we're building." As they stepped into the cool Portland night, Emma found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The path from that first mocked casserole to professional triumph hadn't been easy or direct. It had required courage, persistence, and the willingness to believe in her own vision even when those closest to her could not see it. But the rewards had exceeded her expectations, not just in professional success but in personal growth. Not just in proving critics wrong but in transforming relationships through excellence rather than argument. She had built something undeniable in the shadow of doubt, something so authentic and accomplished that it had changed not just her life but the perspectives of everyone around her. As the Blackwells' car pulled away and Emma and Mark began their own journey home, she felt a profound sense of completion. The mockery that had once wounded her had become the motivation that drove her forward. The criticism that had once threatened to diminish her had instead inspired her to create something too excellent to dismiss. "Happy?" Mark asked simply as they walked toward their car, his hand warm in hers. "Beyond that," Emma replied, looking back at the venue where she had demonstrated not just her culinary skill but the power of believing in one's own vision. "Fulfilled." The word captured what she had discovered through her journey, that true fulfillment comes not from external validation but from internal alignment, from creating something that expresses your authentic self so clearly that even the most determined critics must eventually acknowledge its value. It was a lesson she would carry forward into every new venture, every expansion, every opportunity to mentor others facing similar doubts and dismissals. The greatest revenge against mockery wasn't anger or argument, it was excellence so undeniable. It transformed critics into supporters, skeptics into believers, and even the most resistant hearts into reluctant admirers. 5 years after opening time and place, Emma stood in the morning light streaming through the windows of what had once been the Blackwells' backyard. The transformation was complete, not just of the physical space, but of relationships, perceptions, and possibilities. The original Carriage House restaurant now anchored what locals had dubbed the Culinary Campus, a thriving complex that included the teaching kitchen in the renovated main house, an herb and vegetable garden that supplied both the restaurant and cooking classes, and a small publishing office where Emma had produced 2 successful cookbooks. This morning, she was preparing for a special event, the graduation ceremony for the first cohort of students from her culinary mentorship program. 6 promising chefs, selected from diverse backgrounds and experiences, had spent the past year working alongside Emma and her team, developing not just technical skills but the confidence and vision to forge their own culinary paths. Among them was Zoe Chen, whose apprenticeship had evolved into a key role developing the mentorship program. Zoe had blossomed under Emma's guidance, creating a distinctive style that beautifully merged her Chinese and Southern culinary heritage, exactly the vision she had articulated in that first portfolio review years earlier. "Everything's ready in the main kitchen," Zoe reported, joining Emma in the garden. "The students' families are arriving, and the demonstration stations are set up for the showcase." "And the special guests?" Emma asked, adjusting a display of fresh herbs that would frame the ceremony space. "All confirmed," Zoe nodded. "Including the Blackwells." Emma smiled at the mention of her in-laws, reflecting on how significantly their relationship had evolved. What had begun as mockery and dismissal had transformed into a complex but genuine collaboration, with Judith now teaching a popular series on traditional cooking techniques as part of the campus's educational programming. The journey hadn't been without challenges. The expansion from single restaurant to culinary campus had tested Emma's leadership, creativity, and endurance. There had been financial risks, construction delays, staff growing pains, and the constant pressure of maintaining excellence while pursuing innovation. But the results had exceeded even Emma's ambitious vision. Time and place had earned a prestigious James Beard nomination. The cooking school had become a respected training ground for aspiring chefs. The garden supplied not just Emma's kitchen but a small farmer's market that connected the campus to the wider community. Most meaningful to Emma, however, was the mentorship program celebrating its first graduation today. Born from her own experience of struggling against dismissal and doubt, the program provided structured support for talented individuals whose potential might otherwise go unrecognized or undeveloped. "Chef Taylor?" A voice interrupted her reflections. Emma turned to find Miguel Sanchez, one of the graduating students, looking uncharacteristically nervous in his pressed chef's whites. "My family just arrived," he explained, his voice tight with emotion. "My father, he didn't think cooking was a real career for men. But he's here today." Emma recognized in Miguel's situation echoes of her own journey. The battle for respect from those whose approval mattered most personally, if not professionally. "Sometimes people need to see our passion manifested before they can understand it," she said gently. "Today is your opportunity to show him not just what you do, but who you are when you're doing what you love." Miguel nodded, standing a little straighter. "That's why I wanted to thank you, not just for the technical training, but for showing us how to stay true to our vision even when the people closest to us don't understand it." As Miguel rejoined his fellow graduates, Emma felt a profound sense of completion. She had built something meaningful from the ashes of mockery, something that now extended beyond her own success to nurture others facing similar barriers. The garden gradually filled with guests, families of the graduating students, local chefs who had participated in the mentorship program, culinary journalists covering the innovative educational model, and community members who had supported the campus's development. Emma spotted Mark in deep conversation with his father, both men gesturing toward the herb garden Richard had surprisingly helped design. The retired judge had discovered an unexpected passion for horticulture during the campus expansion, applying his methodical mind to the cultivation of culinary plants with the same precision he had once brought to legal judgments. Judith arrived separately, immaculately dressed as always, carrying a portfolio that likely contained meticulous notes for her upcoming traditional techniques workshop. She had carved out a unique role for herself within Emma's culinary world. Not competing but complementing, offering perspectives on classical methods that provided valuable foundations for more innovative approaches. The ceremony began with a showcase of the graduating students' signature dishes, each presentation reflecting not just technical skill but personal vision and cultural perspective. Miguel's modern interpretation of his grandmother's mole sauce, Tasha's innovative approach to southern seafood, Darius's elegant fusion of French technique and Ethiopian flavors. Emma watched with quiet pride as each student articulated not just the components of their dishes but the journey of developing their culinary voice, many explicitly acknowledging how the program had helped them transform personal history into professional expression. When it came time for Emma to address the gathering, she found herself reflecting on the circuitous path that had led to this moment. 5 years ago, she began, Time and Place opened its doors as a single restaurant. Born from a simple belief, that authentic vision, executed with skill and passion, can transform skepticism into respect. Today, as we celebrate our first class of mentorship graduates, we're witnessing the power of that principle multiplied through each of these talented individuals. Emma gestured toward the students standing proudly beside their showcase dishes. These chefs have learned more than techniques and recipes during their time here. They've learned to trust their unique perspectives, to view their personal histories as sources of distinction rather than limitation, and to persist when faced with doubt or dismissal. She paused, making eye contact with Judith, who sat in the front row with an expression that had evolved from critical assessment to attentive respect. I learned early in my career that the greatest challenge isn't mastering difficult techniques or managing complex flavors. It's maintaining belief in your vision when those around you cannot yet see it, especially when those people are the ones whose approval you most desire. The graduates nodded in recognition, many having shared their own stories of family resistance or professional skepticism during their time in the program. What I hope each of you takes from this experience, Emma continued, is the understanding that mockery often masks fear, fear of the unfamiliar, fear of change, fear of having one's own choices questioned by another's different path. When you encounter that fear disguised as criticism, remember that your response isn't to argue or abandon your vision, but to execute it with such excellence that it becomes undeniable. As Emma concluded her remarks and prepared to present the graduation certificates, she noticed a familiar figure entering at the back of the gathering, Vivian Montgomery, now in her 80s but still elegant and sharp-eyed, the woman whose belief in Emma's potential had provided crucial support when family validation was absent. The ceremony transitioned to a celebration lunch, with graduates and their families enjoying a menu that incorporated elements from each student's showcase dish, a culinary conversation across cultures, techniques, and traditions that embodied the program's collaborative philosophy. Emma moved among the guests, accepting congratulations on the program's success while deflecting attention to the graduates themselves. As she approached Vivian's table, the older woman reached for her hand with surprising strength. "You've created something remarkable here," Vivian said, gesturing to the vibrant scene around them. "Something far beyond what we envisioned when you entered the incubator program." "I had excellent guidance," Emma acknowledged, thinking of how Vivian's early support had helped counter the weight of Judith's dismissal. "Guidance only matters when it falls on fertile ground," Vivian replied with characteristic directness. "You've done what the truly successful always do, built something that extends beyond your own achievements to nurture the next generation." Before Emma could respond, she felt a touch on her shoulder and turned to find Judith standing behind her, portfolio still clutched in one hand. "Vivian," Judith nodded in greeting before turning to Emma. The students' presentations were quite impressive. Particularly Miguel's interpretation of traditional mole, maintaining authenticity while introducing modern elements. It showed respect for heritage without being constrained by it. The observation, appreciating both tradition and innovation, rather than favoring one exclusively, demonstrated how significantly Judith's perspective had evolved over the years. No longer did she view culinary approaches as a binary between proper tradition and frivolous experimentation. She had developed a more nuanced appreciation for the conversation between past and present that characterized thoughtful cooking. "Miguel would appreciate hearing that from you," Emma suggested. "Your traditional techniques workshop was particularly influential for his approach to foundational elements." The idea that Judith's teaching had positively influenced a promising young chef, that her perspective was valued rather than dismissed, visibly pleased her. "I'll make a point of speaking with him before I leave." As Judith moved toward Miguel's table, Vivian watched with knowing amusement. "That woman has come quite a distance," she observed. "From trying to undermine your application to teaching in your program. Rather remarkable." "People can surprise you," Emma replied, "if you give them the opportunity to see something from a different perspective." The celebration continued into the afternoon, eventually transitioning to more intimate conversations as families departed and the graduates gathered for a final reflection session with Emma and her teaching team. "Tomorrow, you return to your own kitchens, your own projects, your own visions," Emma told the small circle of newly minted chefs. "You'll face challenges different from those you encountered here, some professional, some personal, some that blur the lines between the two. When those challenges arise, remember that you're not just cooks. You're storytellers, cultural ambassadors, artists working in a medium that connects people across every conceivable boundary." As the graduates shared their plans and aspirations, Emma found herself thinking about her own journey, not just the professional milestones but the personal transformations that had accompanied them. The evolution from seeking approval to offering mentorship. The shift from proving critics wrong to helping others find their authentic voice. Later that evening, after the campus had quieted and the day's events had concluded, Emma found herself alone in the garden, sitting on a bench beneath the arbor that connected the restaurant to the teaching kitchen. The physical path between these spaces mirrored her own journey from private passion to public mission, from personal vindication to community creation. Mark joined her as twilight softened the garden's edges, settling beside her with the comfortable familiarity of partners who had weathered significant challenges together. Successful day, he observed, his tone appreciative rather than questioning. Beyond what I imagined, Emma agreed. Seeing the students with their families, watching them present their work with such confidence, it felt like completing a circle. Speaking of family, Mark said, a hint of amusement in his voice, Mom has apparently recruited Miguel to assist with her next workshop series. She was quite impressed with his respect for fundamental techniques, direct quote. Emma laughed softly, appreciating the irony of Judith enthusiastically mentoring a student from the program she had once attempted to undermine. Your mother has discovered her own second act, she observed. Teaching suits her, all that knowledge and precision finding a receptive audience. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the garden fade into evening shadows. Finally, Mark asked the question that had been forming since the ceremony's conclusion. What's next? The restaurant is thriving, the campus is established. The mentorship program has proven itself. Where does Emma Taylor direct her considerable energy now? It was a question Emma had been considering herself, not from restlessness but from recognition that evolution was essential to growth. The path from mockery to mentorship had never been about reaching a final destination but about continuing to transform challenges into opportunities, limitations into distinctions. I've been thinking about expansion, she said thoughtfully. Not physically, but conceptually. Taking the mentorship model beyond Portland, creating opportunities for underrepresented voices in other culinary communities. A network rather than just a campus, Mark suggested, immediately grasping the vision. Exactly. Connecting with chefs in different regions who share our philosophy, creating fellowship programs that bring promising talents here for training before they return to their communities to establish their own mentorship initiatives. The concept had been forming gradually, a way to extend impact without diluting quality, to create meaningful change in the culinary world without sacrificing the personal connection that made the current program effective. That sounds ambitious, Mark noted, though his tone conveyed support rather than doubt. And exactly like you, always finding ways to transform success into significance. As they discussed the possibilities, Emma found herself reflecting on the distance between her current reality and that first mocked casserole. The journey hadn't been simple or straightforward, it had involved setbacks, compromises, recalibrations, and unexpected allies. But throughout, she had maintained faith in her fundamental vision, adapting its expression without abandoning its essence. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor to the campus, Harold Preston, the renowned restaurateur whose empire included 12 acclaimed establishments across the Pacific Northwest. Emma had met him briefly at industry events but had never spoken with him at length. I attended yesterday's graduation somewhat incognito, he explained as Emma welcomed him into her office. My granddaughter is considering culinary school, and I wanted to observe your program without the filters that sometimes accompany my presence. Emma offered coffee, curious about the purpose behind this unscheduled visit from one of the region's most influential culinary figures. What I witnessed yesterday was extraordinary, Preston continued, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. Not just skilled cooking, there are many programs that produce technically proficient chefs. What distinguished your graduates was their individual voice, their ability to articulate not just what they were cooking but why, the personal and cultural contexts that informed their culinary decisions. The observation was perceptive, identifying precisely what Emma had designed the program to develop, not just competence but perspective, not just skill but significance. That's intentional, she acknowledged. Technical proficiency is necessary but not sufficient. We focus equally on helping students identify and develop their unique culinary point of view. Preston nodded thoughtfully. It's an approach that addresses what I see as a critical gap in our industry. We have plenty of chefs who can execute recipes. We have far fewer who can translate personal experience into meaningful food experiences for others. He set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. I've been considering establishing a foundation to support culinary diversity, providing resources for talented individuals whose backgrounds and perspectives are underrepresented in our industry. After yesterday, I'm convinced your mentorship model should be central to that initiative. The proposal that followed was both surprising and aligned with Emma's own evolving vision, a collaborative effort that would extend the mentorship program's approach through a network of regional partnerships, fellowship opportunities, and educational resources. Your campus would remain the flagship, Preston explained, but the model would be adapted for implementation in diverse communities, with local chefs serving as primary mentors and your team providing curriculum and training support. The possibility of scaling her approach while maintaining its integrity, of extending impact without sacrificing quality, resonated deeply with Emma's emerging thoughts about her next chapter. It's remarkably aligned with directions I've been considering, she admitted, sharing her preliminary ideas about creating a mentorship network. Great minds, Preston smiled, though his expression quickly returned to serious consideration. The foundation would provide substantial funding, operational support, and industry connections. What we need is your philosophical framework, curriculum, approach, and personal involvement in establishing standards and training regional mentors. As they discussed specifics, Emma found herself energized by the potential to address systemic challenges she had experienced personally, the barriers faced by those whose culinary perspectives diverged from established traditions, whose personal backgrounds didn't align with industry expectations, whose voices might be dismissed without proper nurturing and platform. By the time Preston departed, they had outlined a preliminary framework for collaboration, a phased approach that would begin with pilot programs in 3 communities before expanding to a more comprehensive network. That evening, Emma shared the conversation with Mark over dinner at their favorite table in time and place, the same corner spot where the Blackwells had first experienced her cooking as reluctant customers rather than critical in-laws. It's perfect timing, Mark observed as Emma described Preston's proposal. The campus is stable enough to serve as a foundation, and you've been looking for ways to extend impact without losing the personal connection that makes the program effective. It would mean more travel, Emma noted, considering practical implications. Regional visits, mentor training, program evaluations, and more opportunities to transform mockery into mentorship on a larger scale, Mark added, recognizing the philosophical significance beneath operational details. To create pathways for others facing the same barriers you encountered. The perspective, viewing the opportunity through the lens of her own journey from dismissed home cook to respected culinary leader, crystallized Emma's decision. This wasn't just a logical next step professionally, it was the meaningful extension of a personal mission to transform limitation into distinction, criticism into creation. The following week brought a gathering that would have seemed impossible years earlier, a strategy session for the new initiative held in Emma's office, with Judith Blackwell and Vivian Montgomery both participating alongside Preston's foundation team and Emma's key staff members. We need to consider regional variations, Judith noted as they discussed curriculum adaptation. Culinary traditions differ significantly across communities. The mentorship model must respect those differences while maintaining consistent standards. Her contribution, practical, insightful, focused on honoring tradition while enabling innovation, demonstrated how completely her relationship with Emma's work had transformed. No longer a critic from the outside, she had become a thoughtful contributor from within, offering perspectives that complemented rather than contradicted Emma's approach. Judith raises an essential point, Vivian agreed. The strength of Emma's model is its balance between technical foundations and personal expression. That balance will look different in various cultural contexts. As the discussion continued, Emma found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought these unlikely allies together in common purpose. The path from mockery to mentorship had never been solely about her own vindication, it had always contained the seeds of a larger transformation, a way of creating opportunity from obstacle not just for herself but for others facing similar barriers. The meeting concluded with clear next steps, site visits to potential partner communities, curriculum adaptation workshops, mentor identification, and training plans. The initiative was taking shape as a natural evolution of everything Emma had built, extending her vision while remaining true to its essential principles. That evening, as Emma walked through the quiet campus after hours, she paused in the garden that connected the restaurant to the teaching kitchen. The physical path between these spaces represented her own journey, from proving critics wrong to empowering new voices, from seeking validation to offering opportunity. The expansion ahead would extend that path beyond the boundaries of her own experience, creating connections with communities and individuals she had yet to meet. But the fundamental principle remained consistent, the belief that authentic vision, executed with skill and passion, could transform skepticism into respect, limitation into distinction, mockery into mentorship. A light still burned in the teaching kitchen, where Zoe was preparing materials for the next day's class. Through the window, Emma could see her moving with confident precision, occasionally making notes in a journal beside her workspace, likely recording ideas for her own future restaurant, a concept she had been thoughtfully developing throughout her time in the mentorship program. The site embodied everything Emma had hoped to create, not just a successful business but a meaningful legacy, not just personal vindication but a cycle of opportunity that would continue beyond her direct involvement. Zoe would eventually establish her own culinary vision, perhaps facing her own skeptics and critics, but carrying forward the lesson that mockery need not define or limit authentic expression. As Emma turned toward home, she reflected on the distance between her current reality and that first holiday dinner where her cooking had been dismissed and ridiculed. The journey hadn't followed a straight or simple path, it had involved risks, setbacks, unexpected allies, and continuous evolution. But throughout, she had maintained faith in her fundamental vision, adapting its expression without abandoning its essence. She had discovered that the most powerful response to mockery wasn't argument or anger but excellence, creating something so authentic and accomplished that it transformed critics into supporters, skeptics into students, and limitations into distinctions. That lesson, learned through experience and now shared through mentorship, would extend through the new initiative to communities and individuals she might never meet personally. The cycle of transformation would continue, creating opportunities from obstacles, distinction from difference, and mentorship from mockery for generations of culinary voices yet to be discovered. As Emma reached her car, she glanced back at the illuminated campus, the restaurant, the teaching kitchen, the garden connecting past to future. What had begun as a personal journey of vindication had evolved into a communal mission of opportunity. The mockery that had once wounded her had become the motivation that now inspired others. In that transformation lay the most profound lesson of her journey, that success is measured not just in personal achievement but in meaningful impact, not just in proving critics wrong but in creating opportunities for others to prove themselves right. She had built something authentic in the shadow of doubt, something so undeniably excellent that it had changed not just her own life but the lives of countless others who would carry its principles forward into their own unique expressions. And in that continuous cycle of transformation, from limitation to distinction, from mockery to mentorship, from personal vision to communal opportunity, lay the true measure of what Emma Taylor had created in a backyard where her cooking had once been ridiculed, not just a restaurant or a campus or a foundation initiative, but a legacy of authentic expression that would continue to flourish long after that first critical dinner had faded from memory. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.